Hare Krishna, everyone. Welcome back to the daily readings of Srila Prabhupada's books. Unfortunately, the live streaming is down today because somehow or other Facebook is down. I've been reading something about it, that there's some things about, the desires of some of the big politicians who are going to be running for president next time, or talking about breaking up the big guys, and Facebook is one in their sights. Who knows what's going to happen? Just remember, everything in this material world is temporary. So don't get too attached to anything, because the more attached you get to it, when it changes, the more you suffer. Hare Krishna. Okay, so let's take the medicine. The material body is actually a disease of the spiritual soul. Did you know that? The material body itself is a disease of the spiritual soul. The spirit soul doesn't really need the material body. The spirit soul exists eternally, and in the spiritual world exists eternally in the spiritual body, happy and knowing forever. So welcome to the stepping stones back to the spiritual world. And this is no yellow brick road. This is the real thing. Okay? So let's hear about what Sanatana Goswami had to say about this stepping stone back to the spiritual world, the Srimad-Bhagavatam, brought into the material world by Vedavyas, the literary incarnation of God. Srimad-Bhagavata Mahima Stotram, the glories of the Srimad-Bhagavatam, spoken by Sanatana Goswami. It goes like this. Sarva Shastra Dipiyusha Sarva Vedaika Satpala Sarva Siddhanta Ratnaja Sarva Lokaika Drikprada. O nectar from the ocean of all scriptures, singular fruit of all the Vedas, rich mine of the precious gems of all conclusive truths, you are the only giver of sight to all the worlds. Sarva Bhagavata Prana Srimad Bhagavata Prabho Kalidvandunita Ditya Shri Krishna Parivartita. O life air of all the Supreme Lord's devotees, O Srimad Bhagavatam, you are the sun risen in the darkness of Kali. You are the exact image of Shri Krishna. Paramananda Pataya Prema Varshaksharayate Sarvada Sarvasevyaya Shri Krishnaya Namostume. I bow down to you, who are supremely blissful to read. Your every syllable pours down a flood of prema. You can always be served by everyone. You are Shri Krishna himself. Madeka Bando Matsangin Madguro Mad Mahadana Mandistadaga Mad Bhagya Mad Ananda Namostute. My only friend, my constant companion, my spiritual master, my great wealth, my savior, my good fortune, my source of ecstasy, I bow down to you. Asadu sadhu tadayin Adini chochata kara Hanamun chagadachin mam Premnarit kantayospura. O bestower of saintliness to the unsaintly, O exalter of the most fallen, please never leave me. Always appear in my heart and my voice with pure love. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Okay, we've reached the 29th chapter of the 4th canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam, and just in case you didn't get it, the last two chapters, Narada Muni is going to explain it again. Exactly what all the different allegories and analogies and similes that he gave before. Now he's going to tell us again what it all means. for the thoroughness of the understanding. Hare Krishna. Chapter 29. Talks between Narada and King Pracinabarhi. Text 1. King Pracinabarhi replied, "My dear Lord, we could not appreciate completely the purport of your allegorical story of King Puranjana." See, so we're in good company. Actually, those who are perfect in spiritual knowledge can understand. But for us who are overly attached to fruitive activities, to realize the purpose of your story is very difficult. That goes for almost all of us in the material world. Purport. In Bhagavad Gita 7:13, Lord Krishna says, "Tribir gunamayar bhavayar ebik sarvamidam jagat mohitam nabijanati mamebhyak paramavyayam." Deluded by the three modes, goodness, passion, and ignorance, the whole world does not know me, who am above the modes and inexhaustible. Generally, people are enchanted by the three modes of material nature, and therefore practically unable to understand that behind all materialistic activities in the cosmic manifestation is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. Generally, when people are engaged in sinful or pious activities, they are not perfect in knowledge of devotional service. The allegorical story narrated by Narada Muni to King Bharishman is especially meant to engage conditioned souls in devotional service. The entire story, narrated allegorically, is easily understood by a person in devotional service. But those who are engaged not in devotional service but in sense gratification cannot perfectly understand it. That is admitted by King Bharishman. This 29th chapter describes that by too much attachment for women, one becomes a woman in the next life. But a person who associates with the Supreme Personality of Godhead or his representative becomes free from all material attachments and is thus liberated. Text 2. The great sage Narada Muni continued, "You must understand that Puranjana, the living entity, transmigrates according to his own work into different types of bodies, which may be one-legged, two-legged, three-legged, four-legged, many-legged, or simply legless. Transmigrating into these various types of bodies, the living entity, as the so-called enjoyer, is known as Puranjana." Purport. How the spirit soul transmigrates from one type of body to another is nicely described here. The word ekapada, one-legged, refers to ghosts, for it is said that ghosts walk on one leg. The word dvipada means biped, meaning biped, refers to human beings. When he is old and invalid, the human being is supposed to be a triped or a three-legged because he walks with the help of a stick or some kind of cane or sometimes a danda. Of course, the word chatushpada refers to quadrupeds or animals. The word bahupada refers to those creatures who have more than 4 legs. There are many insects, such as centipede, and also aquatic animals that have many legs. The word apadaka, meaning without legs, refers to serpents. The name Puranjana indicates one who enjoys possessing different types of bodies. His mentality for enjoying in the material world is accommodated by different types of bodies. So I have to make a correction in my analogy of the stick, of the danda. We don't use a danda for crutch because it's an incarnation of Vishnu. We carry it, not only do we carry it, but we make sure it doesn't touch the ground. Hare Krishna. But we're getting a different kind of upliftment from that. Doesn't have to touch the ground to get support. Spiritual support. Okay. Text 3. The person I have described as unknown is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Master, an eternal friend of the living entity. Since the living entities cannot realize the Supreme Personality of Godhead by material names, activities, or qualities, he remains everlastingly unknown to the conditioned soul. Purport. Because the Supreme Personality of Godhead is unknown to the conditioned soul, he is sometimes described in Vedic literatures as Nirakara, Abhigyata, or Avan Manasa Gochara. Actually, it is a fact that the Supreme Personality of Godhead cannot be perceived by material senses as far as his form, name, quality, pastimes, or paraphernalia are concerned. However, when one is spiritually advanced, one can understand the name, form, qualities, pastimes, and paraphernalia of the Supreme Lord. This is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, Bhaktya 1855. Bhaktya mam abhijanati yavanyas chasmi tatpataha. One can understand in truth the Supreme Personality of Godhead only when one is engaged in devotional service. Ordinary persons engaged in pious and impious activities cannot understand the form, name, and activities of the Lord. The devotee, however, can know the personality of Godhead in many respects. He can understand that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that his address is Goloka Vrindavan, and that his activities are all spiritual. Because the Lord's form and activities cannot be understood by materialistic people, he is described by the Shastras as Nirakara, that is, one whose form cannot be ascertained by a materialistic person. This does not mean that the Supreme Personality of Godhead has no form. It means that it is not understood by karmis or fruitive actors. His form is described in Brahma Samhita as Satchidananda Vigraha, as confirmed by the Padma Purana, Atak Shri Krishna Namadi Nabhavad Grayam Indriyai Sevan Mukhehi Jivado Swayameva Spudatyadaha. No one can understand Krishna as he is by utilizing the blunt material senses. However, the Lord reveals himself to his devotees, being pleased with them because of their transcendental, loving service rendered unto him. Since the name, form, quality, and activities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, cannot be understood by the material senses, he is also called adhosaja, meaning beyond sense perception. When the senses are purified by devotional activity, the devotee understands everything about the Lord by the Lord's grace. In this verse, the words Pumbir, Namabir, Va, Kriya, Gunai are especially significant because God, Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, has many names, activities, and qualities, although none of them are material. Despite the fact that all these names, activities, and pastimes are mentioned in the Shastras and understood by the devotees, the karmis, fruitive laborers, cannot understand them. Nor can the jnanis, mental speculators, understand them. Although there are thousands of names of Lord Vishnu, the karmis and jnanis intermingle the names of the Supreme Godhead with the names of demigods and human beings. Because they cannot understand the actual name of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, they take for granted that any name can be accepted. They believe that since the Absolute Truth is impersonal, They can call him by any name. Otherwise, they maintain he has no name. This is not a fact. Here it is clearly stated, Namabir va kriyagunai. The Lord has specific names such as Rama, Krishna, Govinda, Narayana, Vishnu, and Adhoksaja. There are indeed many names, but the conditioned souls cannot understand them. Text 4. When the living entity wants to enjoy the modes of material nature in their totality, he prefers, out of many bodily forms, to accept that body which has 9 gates, 2 hands, and 2 legs. Thus he prefers to become a human being or a demigod. Purport. This is a very nice explanation of how the spiritual being, the part and parcel of Krishna, God, accepts a material body by virtue of his own desires. Accepting 2 hands, 2 legs, and so on, the living entity fully enjoys the modes of material nature. I'm going to say that again. This is a very nice explanation of how the spiritual being, the part and parcel of God, Krishna, accepts a material body by virtue of his own desires. Accepting 2 hands, 2 legs, and so on, the living entity fully enjoys the modes of material nature. Lord Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita 7:27, Ichcha dvesha samutena dvandva mohena bharata sarva bhutani samoham sargayanti parantapa. O scion of Bharata, O Arjuna, O conqueror of the foe, all living entities are born into delusion, overcome by the dualities of desire and hate. Originally, the living entity is a spiritual being, but when he actually desires to enjoy this material world, he comes down. From this verse, we can understand that the living entity first accepts a body that is human in form, but gradually, due to his degraded activities, he falls into lower forms of life, into the animal, plant, and aquatic forms. By the gradual process of evolution, the living entity again attains the body of a human being and is given another chance to get out of the process of transmigration. If he again misses his chance in human form to understand his position, he is again and is given another chance. By the gradual process of evolution, the living entity again attains the body of a human being and is given another chance to get out of the process of transmigration. If he again misses his chance in the human form to understand his position, he is again placed in the cycle of birth and death in various types of bodies. The desire of the living entity to come into the material world is not very difficult to understand. Although one may be born in a family of Aryans where there are restrictions against meat eating, intoxication, gambling, and illicit sex, still one may want to enjoy these forbidden things. There is always someone who wants to go to a prostitute for illicit sex, to a hotel to eat meat and drink wine, or to a gambling club to enjoy so-called sports. All these propensities are already within the hearts of the living entities. Loke viva ya mishapadya seva nityahi jantur. Some living entities can check the desire to enjoy these abominable activities, but others cannot, and consequently fall down to a degraded platform. The more one desires a degraded life within his heart, the more he falls down to occupy different forms of abominable existence. This is the process of transmigration and evolution. A particular type of animal may have a strong tendency to enjoy one kind of sense enjoyment, but in the human form, one can enjoy all the senses. The human form has the facility to utilize all the senses for gratification. Unless one is properly trained, he becomes a victim of the modes of nature, modes of material nature, as confirmed by Bhagavad Gita 3:27. Prakrite kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvashaha ahankara vimudhatma kartaham idimanyate. The bewildered spirit soul, under the influence of the three modes of material nature, thinks himself the doer of activities that are in actuality carried out by nature. As soon as one desires to enjoy his senses, he puts himself under the control of material energy, and automatically or mechanically is placed into the cycle of birth and death in various life forms. Text 5. The great sage Narada continued, the word pramada, mentioned in this regard, refers to material intelligence or ignorance. It is to be understood as such. When one takes shelter of this kind of intelligence, he identifies himself with the material body. Influenced by the material consciousness of I and mine, he begins to enjoy and suffer through his senses. Thus the living entity is entrapped. Purport. In material existence, so-called intelligence is actually ignorance. When intelligence is cleared up, it is called buddhi yoga. In other words, when intelligence is dovetailed with the desires of Krishna, it is called buddhi yoga or bhakti yoga. Therefore, in Bhagavad Gita 10:10, Krishna says, Tesham satati yuktanam bhajatam pritipurvakam dadami buddhi yogam tam yenamam upayanti te. To those who are constantly devoted and worship me with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me. Real intelligence means linking with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. When this is done, the Supreme Personality of Godhead from within gives one the real intelligence by which one can return home, back to Godhead. Intelligence in the material world is described in this verse as pramada, because in material existence, the living entity falsely claims things to be his. He thinks, I am the monarch of all I survey. This is ignorance. Actually, nothing belongs to him. Even the body and the senses do not belong to him, because they are given to him by the grace of the Lord to satisfy his different propensities through the material energy. Nothing actually belongs to the living entity, but he becomes mad after everything, claiming, this is mine, this is mine, this is mine. Janasya moho yamaham mameti. This is called illusion. Nothing belongs to the living entity, but he claims that everything belongs to him. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu recommends that this false intelligence be purified. Cheto Darpanam Arjanam. When the mirror of the intelligence is polished, the real activities, when the mirror of intelligence is polished, the real activities of a living entity begin. This means that when a person comes to the platform of Krishna consciousness, his real intelligence acts. At that time he knows that everything belongs to Krishna and nothing belongs to him. As long as one thinks that everything belongs to him, he is in material consciousness. And when he knows perfectly that everything belongs to Krishna, he is in Krishna consciousness. Text 6. In other words, Krishna consciousness isn't mechanical. It requires that one think a certain way. It's not just doing a certain activity, it's actually doing it with a certain consciousness. Prabhupada used to say, first become conscious, then you can become Krishna conscious. Most of us just go through life in a mechanical way, doing the things, one thing after another. The parents tell us to do this, we do this, so forth. But Krishna consciousness means you have to think, oh, this doesn't belong to me, it belongs to Krishna. Not just out of a book, but while you're going through the day. Translation. The 5 working senses and the 5 senses that acquire knowledge are all male friends of Puranjani. The living entity is assisted by these senses in acquiring knowledge and engaging in activity. The engagements of the senses are known as girlfriends, and the serpent, which was described as having 5 heads, is the life air acting within the 5 circulatory processes. Purport. Krishna Bahir Mukha Haya Bhogavanchakari Nikatas Damaya Tari Japatiya Dari. Because of his desire to enjoy the material world, the living entity is dressed with the material gross and subtle bodies. Dressed with the material what? Okay, just checking. See who's here. Thus he is given a chance to enjoy the senses. The senses are therefore the instruments for enjoying the material world. Consequently, the senses have been described as friends. Sometimes, because of too much sinful activity, the living entity does not get a material gross body, but hovers on the subtle platform. This is called ghostly life. Because of his not possessing a gross body, he creates a great deal of trouble in his subtle body. Thus the presence of a ghost is horrible for those who are living in the gross body. As stated in Bhagavad Gita 15:10, Utkramam tam stitam bapi bunjanam bap gunan vitam vimudha nanupashyanti pashyanti jnana chakshusha. The foolish cannot understand how a living entity can quit his body, nor can they understand what sort of body he enjoys under the spell of the modes of nature. But one whose eyes are trained in knowledge can see all this. The living entities are merged into the air of life, which acts in different ways for circulation. There is prana, apana, udana, vyana, and samana. And because the life air functions in this 5-fold way, it is compared to the 5-hooded serpent. The soul passes through the Kundalini chakra, like a serpent crawling on the ground. The life air is compared to Uraga, the serpent. Panchavritti. Panchavritti is the desire to satisfy the senses, attracted by 5 sense objects, namely form, taste, sound, smell, and touch. Text 7. The 11th attendant, who is the commander of the others, is known as the mind. He is the leader of the senses, both in the acquisition of knowledge and in the performance of work. The Panchala kingdom is that atmosphere in which the 5 sense objects are enjoyed. Within that Panchala kingdom is the city of the body, which has 9 gates. Purport. The mind is the center of all activities and is described here as Brihad Bala, very powerful. To get out of the clutches of Maya, material existence, one has to control his mind. One has to control what? Really? Can't even see it and you have to control it? Okay. According to training, the mind is the friend and the enemy of the living entity. If one gets a good manager, his estate is very nicely managed. But if the manager is a thief, his estate is spoiled. Similarly, in his material conditioned life, the living entity gives power to the attorney of his mind. As such, he is liable to be misdirected by his mind into enjoying sense objects. Srila Ambarish Maharaj therefore first engaged his mind upon the lotus feet of the Lord. Savai manak Krishna Padardavindayo. When the mind is engaged in meditation on the lotus feet of the Lord, the senses are controlled. This system of control is called yama, and this means subduing the senses. One who can subdue the senses is called the Goswami, but one who cannot control the mind is called Godasa. The mind directs the activities of the senses, which are expressed through different outlets, as described in the next verse. Text 8. The eyes, nostrils, and ears are pairs of gates situated in one place. The mouth, genitals, and rectum are also different gates. Being placed into a body having these 9 gates, the living entity acts externally in the material world and enjoys sense objects like form and taste. Purport. Not being aware of his spiritual position, the living entity, directed by the mind, goes out through the 9 gates to enjoy material objects. Because of long association with material objects, he forgets his real spiritual activities and is thus misled. The entire world is going on being misled by so-called leaders like scientists and philosophers who have no knowledge of the spirit soul. Thus, the conditioned soul becomes more and more entangled. Text 9. 2 eyes, 2 nostrils, and a mouth, altogether 5, are situated in the front. The right ear is accepted as the southern gate, and the left ear is the northern gate. The 2 holes or gates situated in the west are known as the rectum and genital organ. Purport. Of all sides, the eastern is considered most important, primarily because the sun rises from that direction. The gates on the eastern side, the eyes, nose, and mouth, are thus very important gates in the body. Text 10. The 2 gates named Kadyota and Avirmukhi, which have been spoken of, are the 2 eyes side by side in one place. The town named Vibrajita should be understood as form. In this way, the 2 eyes are always engaged in seeing different kinds of forms. Purport. The 2 eyes are attracted by brilliant things, like light. Sometimes we find that little insects are attracted by the brightness of fire, and thus enter into it. Similarly, the 2 eyes of a living entity are attracted by bright and beautiful forms. They are entangled in these forms exactly as the insect becomes attracted to fire. You ever notice what happened when there's a big fire? People come from all around just to look at it, just to watch it. Text 11. The 2 doors named Nalini and Nalini should be known as the 2 nostrils, and the city named Saurabha represents aroma. The companion spoken of as Avaduta is the sense of smell. The door called Mukhya is the mouth, and Vipana is the faculty of speech. Rasagya is the sense of taste. Purport. The word Avaduta means most free. A person is not under the rules and regulations of any injunction when he has attained the stage of Avaduta. In other words, he can act as he likes. This Avaduta stage is exactly like air, which does not care for any obstruction. In Bhagavad Gita 6.34 it is said, Chanchalam himanak Krishna pramati balabadritam tasyaham nigraham manye vayor eva sudushkaram. The mind is restless, stubborn, turbulent, obstinate, and very strong, O Krishna. And to subdue it is, it seems to me, more difficult than controlling the wind. Just as the air or wind cannot be checked by anyone, the two nostrils, situated in one place, enjoy the sense of smell without impediment. When the tongue is present, the mouth continually tastes all kinds of relishable foodstuffs. Text 12. The city called Apana represents engagement of the tongue in speech, and Bahudana is the variety of foodstuffs. The right ear is called the gate of Pitrihu, and the left ear is called the gate of Devahu. Text 13. Narada Muni continued, the city spoken of as Dakshina Panchala represents the scriptures meant for directing pravriti, the process of sense enjoyment in fruitive activities. The other city, named Uttara Panchala, represents the scriptures meant for decreasing fruitive activities and increasing knowledge. The living entity receives different kinds of knowledge by means of two ears, and some living entities are promoted to Pitruloka and some to Devaloka. All this is made possible by the two ears. Purport. The Vedas are known as Shruti, and the knowledge received from them through oral reception is called Shrutidara. As stated in Bhagavad Gita, one can be promoted to the planets of the demigods, or to the planets of the Pitas, forefathers, or even to the Vaikuntha planets, simply through the process of hearing. These things have already been explained in previous chapters. Text 14. The city called Gramaka, which is approached through the lower gate of Asuri, the genital organ, is meant for sex, which is very pleasing to common men who are simply fools and rascals. The faculty of procreation is called Durmada, and the rectum is called Niriti. Purport. When the world becomes degraded, when the world becomes what?
Degraded.
Okay. Civilization becomes demoniac. Becomes what?
Demoniac.
I see. And for the common man, the rectum and the genitals are taken very seriously as the centers of all activity. Even in such a sacred place as Vrindavan, India, unintelligent men pass off this rectal and genital business as spiritual activity. Such people are called sahajya. According to their philosophy, through sexual indulgence, one can elevate oneself to the spiritual platform. From these verses of Srimad-Bhagavatam, however, we understand that the desires for sexual satisfaction are meant for the arvak, the lowest among men. To rectify these rascals and fools is very difficult. After all, the sex desires of the common men are condemned in these verses. The word durmada means wrongly directed, and niriti means sinful activity. Although this clearly indicates that sex indulgence is abominable and misdirected, even from the ordinary point of view, the sahajyas nonetheless pass themselves off as devotees conducting spiritual activities. For this reason, Vrindavan is no longer visited by intelligent men. We are often asked why we have made our center in Vrindavan. From the external point of view, it can be concluded that Vrindavan has become degenerate due to these sahajya activities. Yet from the spiritual point of view, Vrindavan is the only place where all these sinful activities can be rectified by means of taking birth in the forms of dogs, hogs, and monkeys. By living in Vrindavan as a dog, hog, or monkey, the living entity can be elevated to the spiritual platform in the next life. I'll tell you a story. I've been living in Govardhan for, since 19... 94. 25 years. Yeah. And Radhakund is right down the road. So I hear lots of things. I've heard lots of things. And this one devotee came in with a story, and he was present when he heard this. There was one Babaji who left his body, and in the place where Raghunath Das has his samadhi, just right next to Radhakund, there was a debate going on whether this devotee had attained prema. And in the back of the room there was a lady. She raised her head, she says, "Oh yes, I can testify that he attained prema." Get it? Because that's what they think prema is, the sahajas. Hare Krishna. This is not just words. It actually is going on. Therefore, when you go to Vrindavan or Govardhan, or especially Radhakund, you have to be very careful who you go with and who you associate with, and especially who you listen to. Text 15. No joke. Text 15. When it is said that Puranjana goes to Vaishasha, it means that he goes to hell. He is accompanied by Lubdaka, which is the working sense in the rectum. Formerly I have also spoken of two blind associates. These associates should be understood to be the hands and legs. Being helped by the hands and legs, the living entity performs all kinds of work and moves hither and thither. Text 16. The word Antakpura refers to the heart. The word Vishuchina meaning going everywhere, indicates the mind. Within the mind, the living entity enjoys the effects of the modes of material nature. These effects, sometimes called illusion, sometimes satisfaction, and sometimes jubilations. These effects sometimes cause illusion, sometimes satisfaction, and sometimes jubilation. Purport. The mind and intelligence of the living entity in material existence are affected by the modes of material nature. And according to the association of the material modes, the mind is habituated to go here and there. The heart feels satisfaction, jubilation, or illusion according to the effects of the modes of material nature. Actually, the living entity in its material condition remains inert. It is the modes of material nature that act on the mind and the heart. The results are enjoyed or suffered by the living entity. This is clearly stated in Bhagavad Gita 3:27. Prakrite kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvashaha ahankara vimudatma kartaham idimanyate. The bewildered spirit soul, under the influence of the three modes of material nature, thinks himself the doer of activities that are in actuality carried out by nature. Text 17. Formerly, it was explained that the queen is one's intelligence. While one is awake or asleep, that intelligence creates different situations. Being influenced by contaminated intelligence, the living entity envisions something and simply imitates the actions and reactions of his intelligence. Purport. The Queen of Puranjana is described herein as intelligence itself. Intelligence acts both in the dream state and in the waking state. But it is contaminated by the three modes of material nature. Since the intelligence is contaminated, the living entity is also contaminated. In the conditioned state, the living entity acts according to his contaminated intelligence. Although he simply remains an observer, he nonetheless acts, being forced by a contaminated intelligence, which in reality is a passive agent. What does that mean? In reality, it's a passive agent.
soul's unchanging?
Indirectly, it means that when the soul is active, it's always active. But when it comes into the material world and is covered by the material body, it becomes passive. It doesn't really do anything. It desires, then the intelligence and mind acts through the senses, and then the senses act, and the modes of nature around it act in order to fulfill that desire. But the soul is passive. He's not actually doing anything.
Can the soul become active?
The soul, yes. But the soul has to be liberated from the material covering. Then the soul can perform its actual desire, its original pure desire. Therefore it says here, although he simply remains an observer, he nonetheless acts being forced by a contaminated intelligence, which in reality is a passive agent. So the material intelligence causes the soul to be passive, even though it wants to be active. It can't fulfill its real desire. The intelligence forces it to fulfill material desire. In that way he thinks he's the enjoyer. Text 18 to 20. Narada Muni continued, what I referred to as the chariot was in actuality the body. The senses are the horses that pull that chariot. As time passes, year after year, these horses run without obstruction, but in fact they make no progress. Pious and impious activities are the two wheels of the chariot. The three modes of material nature are the chariot's flags. The 5 types of life air constitute the living entity's bondage, and the mind is considered to be the rope. Intelligence is the chariot driver. The heart is the sitting place in the chariot, and the dualities of life, such as pleasure and pain, are the nodding place. The 7 elements are the coverings of the chariot, and the working senses are the 5 external processes. The 11 senses are the soldiers. Being engrossed in sense enjoyment, the living entity seated on the chariot hankers after fulfillment of his false desires and runs after sense enjoyment, life after life. Purport. The entanglement of the living entity in sense enjoyment is very nicely explained in these verses. The word sangvatsara means the process of time is significant. Day after day, week after week, fortnight after fortnight, month after month, year after year, the living entity becomes entangled in the chariot's progress. The chariot rests on 2 wheels, which are pious and impious activities. The living entity attains a certain position in life in a particular type of body according to his pious and impious activities. But his transformation into different bodies should not be taken as progress. Real progress is explained in Bhagavad Gita 4:9. Tyaktva deham punarjanma 90. One makes real progress when he does not have to take on another material body. As stated in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Eta Brahmandi Bari Ananta Jiva Gana Charashi Laksha Yonite Kariye Brahmana. The living entity is wandering throughout the entire universe and taking birth in different species on different planets. Thus he moves up and down, but that is not real progress. Real progress is getting out of this material world altogether. As stated in Bhagavad Gita 8:16, Abrahma Bhuvana Loka Puna Arvatanorjuna Mam Upeta Tukonteya Punarjanmana vidyate. From the highest planet in the material world down to the lowest, all are places of misery wherein repeated birth and death takes place. But one who attains to my abode, O son of Kunti, never takes birth again. Even if one is promoted to Brahmaloka, the highest planet in the universe, he has to come down again to the lower planetary systems. Thus he is wandering up and down perpetually under the influence of the three modes of material nature. Being illusioned, he thinks he is making progress. He is like an airplane encircling the earth day and night, incapable of leaving the earth's gravitational field. Factually, there is no progress because the airplane is conditioned by the earth's gravity. Just as a king is seated on a chariot, the living entity is seated in the body. The sitting place is the heart, and the living entity sits there and engages in the struggle for existence, which goes on without progress, perpetually. In the words of Narottam Das Thakur, Karmakanda Jnanakanda Kevala Visharabandha Amrita Baliya Kebakaya Nana Yoni Sabha Pide Karyara Kadayar Bhakshanakari Tala Janma Adak Patiyaya. The living entities struggles very hard due to the influence of fruitive activity and mental speculation, and simply gets a different type of body life after life. He eats all kinds of nonsense and is condemned by his activities of sense enjoyment. If one really wants to progress in life, he must give up the ways of karmakanda and jnanakanda, fruitive activities and mental speculation. Being fixed in Krishna consciousness, one can become free from the entanglement of birth and death and the vain struggle for existence. In these verses, the words Mriga Trishnan Pradhavati are very significant because the living entity is influenced by a thirst for sense enjoyment. He is like a deer that goes into the desert to search out water. In the desert, an animal simply searches in vain for water. Of course, there is no water in the desert, and the animal simply sacrifices his life in an attempt to find it. Everyone is planning for future happiness, thinking that somehow or other, if he can reach a certain point, he will be happy. In actuality, however, when he comes to that point, he sees that there is no happiness. He then plans to go further and further to another point. This is called Mriga Trishna, and its basis is sense enjoyment in this material world. We'll stop here. Hare Krishna. Okay. Narada Muni is very kindly explaining for the third time, this time more explicitly saying exactly what all the different examples he gave are exactly and how it all fits together. Yes, Bhakta Marcus, you got the open mic.
Nice. Okay, so when Krishna just so decides to show himself, or when we feel his mercy through chanting, if not by material senses, then how do we perceive him?
You can only perceive him through spiritual senses, and the spiritual senses can only manifest themselves when the material senses are purified. That's why we work very strenuously to control our senses and our mind. Until our mind and our senses are purified, you can't see Krishna directly. You can't perceive Krishna directly. You can't even hear these words directly. So, tasmat tvam indriyanyado niyamya vadatarshapa patmanam prajahiyenam jnana vijnana nashanam. Nashana means destroy. Jnana means knowledge. Vijnana means realization. So the desire for material enjoyment, lust, is the destroyer of knowledge and self-realization. And one can get the strength, tasmat tvam inriyanyado, by controlling the senses from the beginning, nyamya bharatarshapa. So therefore in the beginning, either in the beginning of our lives, which would be ideal, normally brahmacharis become brahmacharis when they're 5 years old, start getting the training you guys are getting after having gone through a whole bunch of stuff. You're supposed to start when you're 5, when you haven't gone through so much stuff. Therefore it's a lot easier. Therefore Krishna says, tasmat tvam inriyanyado. But even you're starting late, Krishna says, from understanding the urgency of the situation, one can start to control the senses and become perfect even in this life. But it becomes, you have to become serious, and the reason you have to become serious is because it's not easy. Once the lust has turned in, the love for Krishna, which is the reality, turns into lust, to bring it back into the original state is not easy. But by the process of chanting and hearing without offense, and that's the key, you can translate that is that with controlled mind and senses. To chant and hear with controlled mind and senses. But the holy name is so powerful, even if you're offensive, if you keep chanting and don't stop chanting, then your mind and senses become purified. And in proportion to how purified they become, to that degree, you can perceive the reality. You can perceive the senses as being external to the body, the mind as being external to the body. Like when you start to chant, and all of a sudden you find your mind's going here and there, and you're not chanting anymore. You're going, but your mind is taking you all different places. So Krishna says, yato nischalati manas chanchalam astiram. The mind by nature is chanchala. It's flickering. And therefore the senses are always wanting to go in here because the mind is flickering. The senses are grouped around the mind. So when the mind is flickering, this nature of the mind, the senses want to go here and there. Yato nischalati manas chanchalamastira. Therefore, yato, wherever it goes, the mind, you have to bring it back under the control of the self. And these verses and these thoughts in the Gita, especially the Gita in the beginning, they teach us how to do that, or they give us inspiration. But you have to come to the point at least of remembering them during the day. The most important ones, at least. And then you can see for yourself. It was in a couple of the verses that we just read. That you have to learn the art of seeing through the knowledge. And that takes practice. And we get a booster. When we hear like this, when we hear like this all together, then it helps us to get through the, mind and intelligence to the heart, to the senses, through the senses to the heart.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
My question is about the part of the purport of the last verse we read yesterday. It's factually the path of Bhakti Yoga is the path of hearing directly about the pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu, but those who are not interested in hearing directly about the activities of the Lord, or who cannot understand them, can very effectively hear such stories and fables as this one narrated by Narada Muni. I was wondering if we could like tell pastimes of devotees and like if they're doing like kind of devotional service and experiencing Krishna, if that would be like part of the offense of chanting the glories of God to a faithless person, like if you're trying to preach with some non-devotees around.
Did anyone understand that question? I didn't understand at all.
What other devotees are doing, like the glories of other devotees?
Is that a part of offensive chanting? You just said, is that a part of offensive chanting? Or did you mean to say inoffensive chanting?
He's asking, is it offense to tell the glories of devotees to the people when the non-devotees are present? Is that what he was saying?
Yeah, faithless person.
Instead of talking about Krishna in front of non-devotees, talking about
Krishna's devotees in front of non-devotees.
in front of non-devotees, is that offensive?
As a part of preaching.
As a part of preaching.
Yeah.
The offense against the holy name is to chant, is to explain the details of the glories of the holy name, the intimate glories of the holy name to a faithless person. Why? Because then they will criticize or will tend to reject and then say something offensive, and you become a accomplice in that offense. But that doesn't mean that you don't talk to non-devotees and try to convince them that they're not the body, the basics of Krishna consciousness. And if you use an example of a devotee and how he acts and how he's doing things, because he's, following, that's not an offense. It means to explain the intimate glories of the holy name and the details and the pastimes of Krishna to a person is a non-believer. It's better for those kinds of persons to stick to the basics. You're not the body, you're not the mind. All the examples that we hear daily about dreaming, and waking state, and how we're in both, and all those things. You have to convince the person that not the body before he can hear about God. Yes, Bhakta Duck, by all means. You're up.
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
I just wanted to know, there's one, Prabhupada is saying in one of the first purports we read, when he's speaking about the desires of the living entity, he says all the propensities are already within the hearts of the living entities for different types of sense enjoyment. And I'm wondering, are these desires there even when the living entity is not yet in the material world, or do they only manifest when he's in the material world?
Desire is a characteristic of the soul. The soul wants to serve and love Krishna. So the fall down is not gross, not like in the material world. The fall down is very, very subtle, such that a thought like, I wonder what would it be like to enjoy like Krishna, or something like that. It's not gross. It's a very, very subtle thing. But in the spiritual world, there's no room for thoughts like that. And it's very rare that the soul in the spiritual world will think like that. It's not that everybody, in the spiritual world thinks like that. Just a few. And then when the soul is by that misuse of its independence, thoughtfulness, is caused to come to the material world, then in contact with material energy, then those material desires become contaminated. And the more one acts in the material energy, the more desires are manufactured. I said this yesterday, are manufactured in the mind, in the subtle body. And then the soul thinks that that's his real desire. So it's a matter of identification. As long as we're identifying with the body, the first step is to accept the instructions of Krishna in the Gita, which explains how it is that we're not the body. So in the beginning, we theoretically accept it. And then we, by that sincerity and by that little faith, we hear it theoretically. Well, what if this is right? Then what's okay? Let me see. And then you put your doubts on the shelf and you start to hear without the doubts always being there when you hear. And in that way, gradually, by the association of Krishna, by the association of the Shastra, by the association of the Guru, by the association of the devotees, by the association of devotional service, then you taste something different. And that increases your faith a little bit. And then at one point, the doubt that you had that you put on the shelf, it gets answered. And then you can take it off the shelf and say, oh yeah, right, okay. And then you throw it away. Just like if you're working in the kitchen and you're cutting up vegetables and you're lazy. So then the vegetables start to pile up. And gradually, and you say, anyway, then it keeps piling up. At one point, the smell will get bad enough that you will take out the garbage. It's like that. So when the smell gets bad enough, when the doubt becomes revealed to you as a doubt, and as it's something that doesn't belong inside, doesn't belong to you, doesn't help you at all, then you just throw it away. And that process is ongoing. Durina yavadam karma, buddhi yoga dhananjaya, buddhau sharanam anvijja, kripana palahetava. Krishna says to Arjuna, Durina yavadam karma. Cast all abominable activities far away. Durina. How? Buddhi yoga dhananjaya, by devotional service. As long as you're performing devotional service, as long as you're doing what Krishna asks you to do, what your spiritual master asks you to do, even if you don't understand, you become free from abominable activities by becoming fixed in devotional activities. So that assumes that you've surrendered, because you couldn't do that unless you've bodhi. Then the next line is buddhau, with that intelligence, sharanam anvijja, then surrender to the Lord. So it means that there's different levels of surrender. Surrender isn't just once, like they teach in some, I won't mention some religions, they just say, whatever the name they're saying, and they just throw up their hands and say, you're great, or I belong to you, and that's it. And then they do all kinds of abominable things. But because they've said that, they think everything is okay. But no, surrender is moment by moment. I'll say the verse again. Durina yavadam karma, buddhi yoga dhananjaya, buddhau sharana means surrender, anvijja, kripya palahetava. If you don't do that, then you are a miser. And if you remain miserly, you can't get it. You can't understand. So you have to give up that miserly nature and engage yourself. Give yourself, engage your senses, engage yourself in activities that are meant to help others come to Krishna, which means to serve Krishna, because that's what Krishna wants. And if you do that, then Krishna says in the beginning, just I read, when was it, yesterday or the day before? In the 18th chapter, We hear these things every day, but we need to hear these things every day so that we can remember and apply them according to the way our mind's thinking at the moment. And you practice dealing with things according to Krishna's instructions, and then you will become free. Then you will become not Kripana, but Brahmana. Broad-minded, not narrow-minded. Not if things aren't going my way, then I'll just go inside and, not be able to move and act in the world free. Okay? Okay, Hare Krishna. I got to go now because I got to get up early in the morning. Record Tanya Charitamrita. Narada Muni ki jai. Srimad-Bhagavatam ki jai. Sama Veda Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Gaur Premanandi. Hari Hari Bol. And we're going to post this to Facebook as soon as it gets up and running again. Hare Krishna. Thank you.